I want to thank Alejandra del Ángel for this moment and for the invitation here in Princeton. I want to tell you of this book, Millennial Children Trapped Parents. This book is the result of a project born in me several years ago. During the year 2018, I had the pleasure to give a conference, the name of which was the title of this book, that took place in the Biblioteca del Alcázar in Toledo, Spain. There was such a crowd gathered around this topic for the occasion, and the interest as well as the number of questions it sparked off in the audience was such that I immediately knew it was an important subject on which it was necessary to write something. I passed on the idea to the co-founders of Lapsus de Toledo in Spain and America. Some of them couldn't join in because they were already busy with other tasks. Finally, José Tapa, Natacha Carreras, Alejandra del Ángel and I united our desire to write a book on this topic, not only relevant, but also very much asked for. The fact that we live in different Spanish-speaking continents and countries allows each one of us to speak from our own perspective, both clinical and social. This context allows the book to communicate an important message of great general interest, since each one of us, as psychoanalysts, has been able to observe from the viewpoint of our respective clinical field the bonds between parents and so-called millennial children in Spain and Mexico, as well as in USA. The rising problematic in this parents-millennial relationship is so popular that it has led to not only several movies, but also articles and interviews with both parents and millennial children, aiming to try and elucidate the causes of the conflicts of the so-called generation of the millennia. In this book, every one of the co-authors writes 4 chapters. In every chapter, a clinical sequence is commented, giving a case-by-case account of the psychoanalytic clinic. Readers will get the opportunity to familiarize themselves with the unconscious causes that provoke the suffering of some parents whose children belong to this generation and who are living the consequences of the typical characteristics of our era. From the psychoanalytic point of view, it is known that specific events hold an unconscious logical structure, that is, on a psychic level. These events intertwine with others from generations before and go on repeating themselves in people's stories, causing what we call repetition compulsion, that many times the subject does not control because it belongs to the unconscious field. This damage, although they seem unalterable, are not in reality, because from our perspective, a deep analysis can allow a rectification, that is, a modification in a person's behavior regarding this damage. Because of that, in the psychoanalytic clinic, we analyze the place that the child holds in both the mother's and father's desire. This is very important because there are indelible traces that mark the subject way before her birth. As an example, if a mother wanted to have a son and has a daughter, or vice versa, or if a father did not want to have children and the mother decides to stay pregnant without taking into account her partner's desire, or else if a couple decides to become parents and have children to please their own mother, who has confessed her necessity to be a grandmother in order to give her old, empty, meaningless life some meaning. Every personal circumstance in the couple's relationship affects and marks the person's psychic life. That is why it is so important to analyze and understand how the unconscious transmission are established in the subject. To understand what there is underneath the relationship that causes suffering, it is indispensable to know how this unconscious message has been transmitted. Sometimes they are passed on through language, both verbal and corporal. Other times through Freudian slips, jokes, or dreams that parents tell their children, and other occasions, the most mysterious and hardest to know, the messages are hidden. When the message in the unconscious transmission are hidden, it is much harder to shed light on them, which is why sometimes the psychoanalytic treatment takes time. It is not a quick treatment like some existing therapies nowadays that promise the disappearance of symptoms in a matter of weeks. Hidden messages are always repressed. Some of them can be found, for instance, between the lines of the discourse. That is, when a person does not say things with words, but says them in other ways. In some occasions, there has not even been a mother or a father to transmit the message. The society itself passes if on through the social laws necessary for social bonds between humans to exist. Whichever way this unconscious message were transmitted on a psychic level, the listening process in the psychoanalytic clinical field bears witness that these transmissions do not only go from parents to children. They in many occasions include several generations before. For this reason, it is necessary to point out that millennials' parents were children too. This reliable fact allows us to understand that these parents held a discourse that precedes them and puts them within a maze which transforms them in their turn into unconscious subject. This leads us to the question, what era was it when millennials' parents were children? When were these parents born? Millennial parents were born during the 50s and the 60s. As young people, this generation wanted to leave their parents' home. Their generation was one to often suffer from tyrannical parents, parents who did not respect their children's desires, but rather imposed their own. They forced and tyrannized their children. That is at least what we hear in many cases during the clinical analysis of these parents. We can then say that many of these children, by the time they became parents, wanted to do better than their own parents and wanted their children not to complain about the things they themselves complained about as children. What was their complaint as children? Having tyrannic parents, parents who did not respect their children's desire. Because of that, a change took place. A change in the position of these new parents. They wanted to respect their children's desire and did not want to impose things on or tyrannize them. But it seems that things did not turn out the way parents would have wanted, at least in some cases, since as a result, there are millennial children who are not willing to be independent and put themselves in the role of tyrants, enslaving parents and making of their generation, the one commonly called sandwich generation, meaning they are people in the middle of two tyrannies. The parents one first, and then the children's tyranny. This book performs a deep analysis of millennial children's problem, the relationship with their parents, their environment, and the current society. We will talk about parents because they do not know what to do with these children. Many of them, teen children, how live complaining and blaming parents for their own immaturity and mediocrity, blackmailer children and parasites who do not want to leave the nest and wish to make slaves of their parents. We will talk about the divorce of parents. Many of millennial parents are divorced. The generation of parents who were born in the 50s and the 60s is a generation of divorced couples. This is an interesting observation, since their parents, that is millennials' grandparents, did not divorce. However, what many of them passed on their children is that they kept on living with a person they no longer loved. Is that the reason for so many divorces among millennial parents? Many of them say they would rather divorce than live a bitter life like their parents next to a person they did not love anymore. In this book, we will take a look at any study the questions rising from gender difference. The differences between genders are deeply studied not only from the anatomical viewpoint, which we all know they are, but also from the psychic one. We know that, as much as some claim the contrary, men and women are not identical. Not only are we not identical, we are actually very different. However, we cannot elude the obvious. The difference between men and women does not mean we shouldn't seek equality in rights. But, in my opinion, the solution is not to try and erase the difference between genders, since doing that only brings with it worse symptoms and worse suffering on a psychic level, as our praxis shows. Based on that, in this book, we will see how these current questions are experienced on a psychic level, and in some cases, that is how some subjects react to ideas of equality between genders, single mothers on one hand, single fathers on the other hand. We will dive into gender-related questions, trying to observe the psychic and sexual difference between masculine and feminine, both on the level of the subject's mother or father function and her function as a son or daughter. To conclude, I want to express my desire. My desire is for these parents to free themselves of the guilt which does not let them live. That through the reading of this writing, they manage to access a knowledge and a truth they did not have before reading this book. That this new truth and knowledge help them understand their position as parents of millennial children. That the analysis of that position, so personal and unique, allows them to find the strength to change that which is hurting them, has them suffering as parents, so that finally they can, if they their desire, do what animal species teach us to: feed, love, and educate children throughout the raising period. But once finished this step, find the strength to send them away, even though millennial children are reluctant to leave the nest. If not, when? Thank you.